Edosa, so lovely to see you. How are you doing today?
I'm really, really good. And thank you, Catherine, for having me on the show.
You are most welcome. Now, obviously, it was fairly recently that you and I connected for the Business of Data podcast, where we touched on a few of the elements that we're talking about today. How have you been since then?
It's been full throttle. It's been very, very busy. Work-wise, it's been plenty going on, even more so than anticipated. So it's been great, but also resettling. Obviously myself moving countries, of course, moving home, job, and family as well. So there's been a lot of a few things to consider.
A little bit busy then, to say the least, for sure. Now, for those in the audience who perhaps haven't listened to our podcast episode yet, give us a bit of background. You've only just begun this role, but just give us a little bit of a flavour for what you're up to in your organisation.
Yeah, sure. So I joined in April. So I moved from the UK to Saudi Arabia, to Riyadh, sunny Riyadh. It's lovely and sunny as always here. And I think the key thing to obviously to talk about here is I've moved from insurance into insurance, so that's not a big change. But interestingly, here I've moved into Tawuniya, which is the biggest insurer in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, but also it's got more to it than that. It was the first, and actually the definer of what insurance means in the kingdom. It's so ingrained that it exists in the legislation here, as a way to understand what insurance actually means. So it's a significant move. Insurance is different here for those who understand insurance in the West or in other parts of the world. Certainly, it's a bit of a different take on it here in Saudi Arabia. But also, I think just in terms of context of what is kind of going on here, which I suspect we might dig into a bit during the conversation, it's really a significant transformation that we're thinking about here at Tawuniya, and it's actually kicked off already. So it's exciting times.
Yeah, well, very exciting times for sure. Now, I just want to pick up on the fact that you are, I'm correct in saying this, aren't I, that you are the first CDAO for the organisation, aren't you?
Absolutely the first, but also it's probably good to put this into context, actually. Across the kingdom here of Saudi Arabia, the concept of a CDO is new. And interestingly, it's actually something that is being passed in through legislation as well. So it's actually been put into law.
Okay.
And it's really, really interesting because it's coming through the kind of privacy angle, but it's now expanded into kind of everything. And so the take here on what data should actually be is quite significant, and it's actually attached and linked into the bigger vision of the Crown Prince, which is the 2030 vision, which a lot of people might be aware of, and people will think about things like NEOM, which is a very big project, new mega city. But I think a lot of things actually are going to empower and enable that to happen.
That's really, really interesting, and obviously quite different to other geos that will be dialing into the global festival with us today, and obviously watching this then on demand in other situations here at Corinium. So lots of food for thought in that. Now, you've walked into this new role, new country, new everything, apart from industry. And there is an increasing school of thought, or rather, when I'm doing my research for all the various content that we produce here within the Business of Data, is this challenge around setting expectations of where we're going to go, what we're going to do, how long it's going to take, what it's going to require, where we are in that moment in time, in the sense of what is our data quality like, everything that considers into an expectation. Set the scene for me. When you were agreeing this role, what expectations did you set the organization? Did you have a very clear conversation with them saying, this is where we are and this is where we're going? Or did that kind of happen after you'd accepted the role?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think it was really good before I accepted the role. Actually, that we went through a fair amount of kind of the situation, and the great thing I have to say is that unlike I've been in a few organizations and I've gone through a few sort of recruitment processes, but I think that one thing I can say is that reality wasn't very far from the picture that was painted, if you like, on coming in. However, there's only so much you can go through during a pre-conversation. It's very, very different when you actually land and see what things are like. But the current state is only a part of it, and it'll be no huge surprise if you haven't had a CDO. There'll be a huge gap in terms of where things are in terms of maturity of the organization from a data standpoint, what can be achieved. But I think what's really significant is where we're trying to go, which is even if you did have a CDO and you maintain status quo in terms of your current operations, the kind of ambition that we now have would still have been a massive step change.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting actually that you draw on the fact that what you were talking about in that recruitment process versus what you came into is quite similar, because I think that has been a huge pain point I've certainly heard before, where kind of, oh yeah, everything's great, or you're going to have all these resources, or there's kind of a big promise. You get into it and it's like, oh, hang on, that's nowhere near. And occasionally I'm assuming it can be a positive, is, oh, this is much better than you picked it. And I think that's really key as well, because especially in this job market, especially in the fact that people are moving around so much, if you're not giving a very clear picture, I think that's going to just create problems right from the start. And I think that's going to then be a difficult adjustment period. Would you agree?
I agree. I think, but the thing I would say to people is that, look, we term it picture isn't as static as a picture. Yeah. So I think honesty is a big thing, and I think a big thing here, certainly what I'm finding in Tawuniya, is honesty, trust is quite significant a factor in terms of values here. The picture is constantly changing, so you might say that things are actually quite different now from the picture I had beforehand, but that's just because the business is moving, the market's changing, there's lots of different things kind of going on. But I think at every point in time, you want to make sure that there's clarity, there's honesty, there's and you're also stating it as it is from your perspective as well. So I think that's a key thing. It's brilliant here. I think one of the key things I'm finding is that it is it's everyone's accessible, everyone's open, all through the hierarchy, from the top, from the CEO, all the way through to the senior leadership group, and everyone within their teams. So it's so much easier to actually be very, very quick to understand this changing picture as things move around. And it's something that I would certainly advise that people should expect things to change.
Yeah. Now, I mentioned there that you're the first CDAO. Did you feel the pressure, and I don't mean from the organization necessarily, but from yourself, did you feel the pressure to promise the world a little bit, to say, yeah, we're going to achieve all these wonderful things, or not?
It's kind of a yes, but because I think it's important to promise the world from the viewpoint of data is huge, and especially given my experience, I've seen what data can actually do. So I think from that perspective, there is the world to be promised. And in fact, to be honest, even given my background, there's so much even more. Even if I sort of sat back in the UK or went elsewhere, we're not at the peak of what data can actually achieve yet. So there is the world to be promised, but also we need to sort of almost place that within the context of reality. Where are we now? What can we achieve? And I think that's a very important element to bring. You need to base it in reality and make sure that context is clear.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, it is such an exciting time to be in this industry that there is, I mean, there is so much that we can do. And especially in financial services and insurance as well, so far along that it can be really quite a fun conversation. You can let it run away with you as well, right? It's because, oh, we could be doing this, and yeah, but it's that boundary setting. And where did you kind of draw the boundaries for yourself? Because I mean, you know, we've spoken many times before. You're clearly a very passionate person when it comes to this stuff. So how do you kind of maintain that passion so that you're not setting expectations that are going to be too challenging for you and your team to deliver, but also not, you know, kind of setting expectations and then the business saying, well, hang on, you've not delivered this in the first 12 months. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest things, to be honest. I think, especially when you're in an organization where you're managing that maturity level, you're not quite there in terms of where you're trying to go. I think it's really, really important to base things on what's physical, what's tangible. So, for instance, rather than go, okay, my strategy is just to build this great big data lake and clean all the data on the planet, is actually to say, how can we base that on the organization's actual strategy? And the great thing about what's the situation here at Tawuniya is that we had gone through quite a significant strategy exercise even before I joined. So in some ways, that actually made it quite easy to look at, okay, so what is it that we're actually trying to do, and basing everything very, very sort of tightly around that, specific elements around the strategy, specific initiatives that are actually looking to be done, and saying, like, hey, to achieve that, we need to do this. Is a very, very big and very sort of a powerful way to connect things and connect the message. And so when you do it that way, you can actually then look at, how do I put sort of a boundary around the possibility of achieving X, Y, or Z. So I think that's the way for me to then base the big promise of the world in the context of reality, and say, okay, given that we want to do all these different things, what does it physically then mean in terms of what we need to be committing to?
Yeah. So what I'm hearing from that is essentially, don't reinvent the strategic wheel. Essentially, it's a case of there is already going to be this journey that the business are going on, and it's a case of understanding that, as opposed to kind of like I say, reinventing your own one.
Yeah, it's right. But I think the one thing I would add to that is that there's absolutely no harm in trying to influence that strategy and sort of partner in that strategy and shape it. But I think reinventing, absolutely not. No, there's absolutely no need to do that.
So talk to me in terms of physical examples. You started in April. When you walked into the business, what were you doing to understand this strategy, to understand your stakeholders, to understand the expectations? Because although the way we phrase this interview is about the CEO, but obviously there's going to be business expectations as well, saying, oh, we've got Edosa, he's coming in. There's going to be expectations from different departments of what you are going to bring to the table, who you are, etc. So what were you doing April into the months that we're in now, to find out what those expectations are, but also to understand that strategy?
That's such a great question, because even though, like I say, there is a sense of, here's a strategy. I mean, in the end, there's some big ticket items around the strategy, and that's great. And of course, not having a CDO would mean that it's obviously a risk that there were bits within the strategy that didn't have sufficient data input to understand, what does this mean from a data perspective. So what I've been doing, I suppose my first sort of few weeks in the job, was really to almost go and hear it from the key stakeholders. What is it that you're expecting? What is it that is your current pain point from a data standpoint? But also, what are your ambitions just in terms of your business in itself? And that's very, from my view, a very powerful way to then almost take that strategy, take the organization and really understand what's going on with that. And what's really interesting about that exercise is then you can take all of that and say, okay, let's look at the strategy now, put that into context, but also let's look at the things I'm hearing that are not necessarily called out in the strategy, and some of them perhaps quite significant, especially from a data viewpoint. And what else did you think you should have heard that you didn't? given your background, both in terms of data, but also in terms of financial services and insurance. So in some ways, that was, really, really powerful exercise, and actually then set out for me the way to play back. Okay, so here's here's a situation, and here's a state of play across the organization.
Yeah, a really good opportunity to just get that temperature check of who is doing what and what's going on in the general feeling as well. Because again, you're in such a unique position coming in as the first CDAO that you don't have anyone's legacy to either be a good thing and they're already won over by data potentially, or the other way that they may be completely disengaged with data. So it really does start with you. So you've got that kind of greenfield environment. But with that, you've got to kind of understand where everyone is on that journey of data drivenness in that sense, because as we know, that's such a huge scale. And again, depending on department, depending on seniority and experience as well. Now, there will be members in the audience that perhaps aren't as confident at pushing back at some expectations or suggestions from whether that's kind of grassroots or whether it comes from above in terms of that's kind of senior leadership team. What would be your piece of advice to help them gain that confidence to really push back at expectations that just, could not be delivered in the time frame or couldn't be delivered due to resource or some other reason?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm qualified to give confidence, but I can. I tell you what I can do is definitely give you incentive, to in terms of resetting things into context. I think for me, it's really that the expectation setting is important, right? And like I said, really, especially as a new CDO or data leader of sorts, it's really important that you need to build trust from the get-go, and that's going to be really sort of key in terms of your integrity and even sort of how you build things kind of going forward. And so for me, what I'd say is, rather than push back and say no, it's actually rebaselining into reality and saying, look, yes, rather than no, yes, but. So here are the things we need to consider in terms of doing X, Y, and Z. And does it mean that actually, rather than 100 odd items, that we need to focus on prioritizing X, Y, and Z? Do you do something like, I'm a big proponent of this, shape things out first before scaling and saying, look, let's shape it around this key big ticket items, and then look at how is this actually shaping, how is it actually delivering value, is it now moving those initiatives in the right sort of direction, and then consider, do we need to scale up? And mainly, if you think about it from that viewpoint, scaling is really about pace, is how much you need to deliver over a period of time. And I think that's an important thing to think about. And it's really, it's almost taking that passion of, oh yes, we need to do all of these different things and whatever else, into, okay, what is it that we can physically do given our capabilities, given our current capacity, and just setting things in the context of the market, where things are, within the talent market, within actually setting out tools and technologies, etc. So it's really that. And I think from my viewpoint, don't say no, just say yes, but.
Yeah, I like that positive reframing. Now, the last question I want to ask is kind of a change of tact, really, because the way that I've been asking these questions is on the assumption that they're wanting the world and you're promising the world. Have you ever had it, whether now or previously, where actually perhaps a business doesn't understand the full capabilities that could be realized quite quickly, kind of those quick wins that are maybe being overlooked, and potentially they're underplaying their expectations, and you've got to kind of go in there and say, hey guys, let's think further afield, let's think bigger than where you're currently where your mind is at?
Oh, absolutely. It does happen both ways. But to be honest, it's rare that it happens at the very start of your engagement, because there's just so much kind of going on. But I've seen this happen time after time, where you get to a point where, of course, you're talking about maturity, you're talking about, okay, just understanding the capability of data. And a lot of times, just because of the history of things, people just automatically think, well, this is data and it might have to do with technology, so it's going to take years to achieve. And you do it in a couple of weeks, and there's this shock in people's faces, right? So absolutely, but that's kind of what I alluded to earlier in terms of partnering in trying to shape possibilities and shape ideas, because actually some things people think, oh, actually, I'm not going to even think about that because that's going to take years, might actually be something that you can deliver very, very quickly. So I think that partnering becomes a very powerful thing.
Edosa, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Catherine. It's lovely to be here.
Goodness me, what a fantastic morning we have had here on day 2. We really hope you have enjoyed those global sessions. We will now be heading into our regional sessions, which will be live, so make sure you come armed with your questions because our speakers would absolutely love to answer them. If you haven't done already, make sure you take a look around the resource area where there's lots of additional content. But for now, let's head into our regional sessions.